kite camp in there, and I couldn't.
Good morning. Call our hearing to order. Please join me in a brief prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the privilege of serving this great nation. We ask, Lord, for wisdom and discernment and understanding as we go about these difficult decisions that affect so many lives across this country and livelihoods as we work on the decisions that this committee has responsibility for. We ask, Lord, that we're worthy of the blessings of being able to do this. We ask for your help and assistance. Forgive us for our failures. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. This hearing on the Committee of Agriculture entitled State of Rural Economy will come to order. And I'd like to thank our Costa, we're going to start as soon as you can make your way up here. So I'd like to thank our star witness, the Honorable Sonny Perdue, for being with us today. It's customary for the Secretary of Agriculture to help the committee kick off a new year. This hearing is an opportunity for the Secretary to offer his assessment of the rural economy and to visit with members of the committee about the full range of issues impacting rural America and agriculture. Of course, it does not take a hearing to appreciate the hardships that rural America and our nation's farmers and ranchers face today. Over the last 4 years, we've witnessed the steepest decline in net farm income since the Great Depression. Producers who always operate on thin margins are struggling to cover their costs. Thankfully, we've taken some important steps in lightening their load. The administration has been moving to unburden farmers and ranchers of unnecessary regulations that cost producers a fortune and put them in legal limbo. And late last year, Congress approved, the President signed into law, a tax reform bill that provides meaningful tax relief for American agriculture. Regulatory and tax relief are already helping America's farmers and ranchers by reducing their costs of doing business. In turn, this means more economic activity and jobs on the farm and on Main Street America. Unfortunately, on the earnings side of the equation, the news has not been as favorable. Natural disasters and high and rising foreign subsidies, tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers have resulted in lost crops and chronically depressed prices. And uncertainty over the direction of trade has exacerbated the anxiety in rural America because the U.S. farmer and rancher depends so much on access to global markets to make ends meet. Crop insurance has been an extraordinarily successful story, providing critical risk management to farmers and obviating the need for Congress to approve ad hoc disaster over the past decade. However, the most costly hurricanes on record have shed some light on the areas where we need to make improvements so crop insurance can better serve, as an example, the Florida orange producer as well as the Iowa corn farmer. Some weaknesses in the Farm Bill safety net have also come to apparent, especially for our nation's cotton and dairy farmers. We on this committee are going to do our level best to address these and other issues through pending legislation and a strong new Farm Bill that the President has declared he wants sent to his desk on time. Toward this end, Mr. Secretary, you developed and presented some very thoughtful and constructive principles to help guide us in charting the course toward our new Farm Bill, and I want to thank you for that. On the trade front, the ball is naturally more in the administration's court than it is ours. I appreciate the administration's strong desire to strike better deals for the United States and to reduce, if not eliminate, our trade deficit. But as you know, Mr. Secretary, there's also deep concern in the countryside that some of the gains that we've made in the way of market access for farmers and ranchers could be lost in this process. In this regard, you've been a critical friend and advocate, and again, I want to thank you for that. With that, I recognize my friend, the ranking member, for comments he would like to make. Alan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Secretary, back to the committee. We appreciate you being here. As those of us here today are well aware, the commodity prices have dropped since the Farm Bill was last reauthorized, and milk prices are also softening as we speak. I'm very concerned that if prices continue to fall and we have any kind of average year or below average year, that we could be in some real trouble. This is one of the reasons that if I had my way, I'd like to see a Farm Bill that had an improved safety net going into this situation. But with no new money, I don't know how we're going to do that. Last year, the President's budget called for $231 billion in cuts to the mandatory Farm Bill programs. You were not yet at USDA when the budget was released, but I hope that we'll be able to see some of your influence in the new budget that's going to come out next week. I'm not sure anybody in the administration other than yourself has much of an understanding of what goes on in agriculture. So we appreciate what you're trying to do, and you're the voice of reason that's at the table, and I wish you luck with that. As I said, I appreciate your efforts to give us some guidance in writing the new Farm Bill, and I hope you will work with us to write a bill that provides an adequate safety net and other tools for our farmers and ranchers, and we look forward to working with you on that, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair would request other members submit their opening statements for the record so our witness may begin his testimony and ensure there's ample time for questions. I'd like to welcome to the witness table this morning the Honorable Sonny Perdue, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington, D.C. Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Peters. Submitted for the record comments, but as you all know, it comes to no surprise that we're in a very different situation when you last contemplated a farm bill regarding commodity prices. And the fact are, I wish there were better news, but there's a lot of stress and a lot of duress on the farms today. The only saving grace for that is we're talking about a constituency that's probably the most resilient among Americans and the most optimistic, or they wouldn't continue to do what they do year in and year out, and putting a lot of the risk of their equity in the ground, hoping for that next good crop. So the state of the rural economy is fragile. It obviously depends on some things that you all will struggle with in this environment, as Ranking Member Peterson talked about. That was a heavy burden of the budget in this time period, and trying to create a farm bill with a better safety net in light of the financial situation that we find ourselves. But the good news is that I think for the most part, the 14 Farm Bill was a good pathway forward. I think, as you all indicated and everyone recognizes, there are a couple of sectors there, particularly dairy and cotton, that didn't fare as well. And I know that you all in this committee have been working toward a solution on that, and I'm hopeful that we can have a viable solution for those two sectors, as well as our specialty crops and others that have fared well. By and large, a safety net is really the goal of the Farm Bill, as well as providing for those who don't have the resources for enough food, but there are a lot of challenges out there. You've got lower commodity prices, as we well know, and frankly, there's a very specific example of that for those of you in grain sorghum country. We know just with the mention of China considering anti-dumping and countervailing duty taxes, the cash price on sorghum dropped over $1, which was 25% just yesterday on the cash prices. So we see how fragile we are from a trade perspective, how dependent our ag economy is on trade, as well as the labor issue. And I know that Chairman Goodlatte and others have mentioned over a permanent legal workforce in agriculture that's vastly needed. The good news is I think we've made some progress on the deregulatory environment, and we'll continue to do that as we seek out comments and opinions from our producers and those interested in the industry about how we produce our food and how we can better do better in the regulatory environment. Certainly, a lot of progress has been made there, but our farmers are more leveraged than they were 5 years ago, and that's a challenge. There's rising debt, not to the level necessarily of the 80s, but concerning, particularly for those beginning farmers, the ones that didn't quite have the advantage of the 2008 to 2013 run-up in commodity prices. But so all of those are challenges that we see going forward. I look forward to you. We've submitted to you our principles on the Farm Bill. By and large, I think you've got a good format to begin with, and I want to applaud Mr. Chairman, you and the committee for getting out around the nation over this last year to hear directly from producers over the things that they believe has been working for them, some of the things they believe might have been working against them, and to understand how we can do better. You may know I've followed many of you in your districts, and I've been there, and I appreciate the hospitality. I think we're at 32 states in 9 months, and hearing with a lot of genuine comments there. As we all know, farmers are not very timid when it comes to telling us what's on their mind, and they've done so. So we've got, I think, a good understanding of where they are. but also our consumers. We were in a food bank in Pennsylvania the other day and saw a great network of providing for people who don't have enough food, and the great news about America, it's a great, generous, and compassionate nation, and I think the Farm Bill does a wonderful job in that as well. So with those comments, I'll try to reserve my answers to be concise, and if I'm not informative enough, you're welcome to ask for comments on the record, and I'll be happy to submit those. So thank you. We're glad to be with you here today.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being here, being with us. Looking forward to your comments. The Chair would remind members that they'll be recognized for questioning in order of seniority. For members who were here at the start of the hearing, after that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate the understanding. We have votes at about 11:30. The Chairman has Secretary has a hard stop at 12, and so I'll ask unanimous consent that we go to a 3-minute clock for our questions in order to give everybody a chance to get their comments in. The 3 minutes will be comments as well as answers to a question if there's a question in the comments. So I'm going to be pretty Rambo about the gavel. If we have time at the end to do a second round, we can do that. But in order to try to get everybody through properly, I'm going to be pretty strict on it so we can get this done. With that, let's see, 3 minutes. With that, I recognize myself for 3 minutes. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned sorghum. One of the things I tell folks is that we've got a president who is defending America's trade policies, which means going after folks who are violating it. China's got a lot of issues going on, and they've recently, I guess over the weekend, announced that they're going to go after our sorghum producers, sorghum here in the United States. We had a tremendous run-up in sorghum exports to China over the last 3 years. Can you visit with us a little bit of what the agency can do in the interim while this is being played out for our sorghum producers?
Well, obviously, the trade environment has created a lot of anxiety over the last year. I believe that our president is absolutely convinced that we can do better. I think by generally we believe that NAFTA, for instance, has been helpful to agriculture in the most sectors. But as I look at some of the provisions and some of Canada's policies regarding the prohibitions against U.S. Products, and I think we can do better. And I think the Mexico and Canada are coming to that conclusion. You mentioned China specifically, and we know that in world trade, China has a policy of dominance in many sectors. The good part about it is American producers are so productive, we've got to have good trade policies, and I think the administration, Ambassador Lighthizer, is working toward policies that will right those. We cannot be responsible for China's reaction. Obviously, the administration knows that we've got to be prepared for that, and we've advocated on behalf of the ag economy to be prepared for any kind of situation that may arise on actions they may take. We think the sorghum issue will mollify over a period of time. It just shows you as an example how fragile and how sensitive the ag economy and commodity prices are now to trade disruptions, and we need to be very careful as we take actions there. No one is saying that we should not, again, take actions over bad actions from China and others regarding intellectual property theft, other types of dumping there. We just need to be very careful at how we handle the ag economy because, as you know, agriculture typically is the point of the spear of retaliatory measures, and we see even the conversation of considering countervailing duties on what they can do to a market like sorghum. So I think everyone in the administration is aware of that, and we're discussing that, frankly, on a weekly basis.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and appreciate those efforts. You'll back the rest of my time. Colin, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I've said to many people what I'm concerned about with this farm bill is that we're going to get wrapped around the axle on SNAP like we did last time. And, it seems like all of the rhetoric I hear regards work requirements for ABODs, able-bodied adults. So we have since '96, we have work requirements in the federal law. You can only get 3 months of benefits if you're an able-bodied adult, unless there's a waiver. So we have 9 states that have statewide waivers. We have 27 states that have some kind of waivers within their boundaries, and we only have 17 that don't have waivers. Now, at one time, you know, when we had high unemployment, you know, that was maybe one thing. But as I understand it, you have the authority to offer or to approve these waivers. So one of the things that it says in there is that an unemployment rate in excess of 10%. So I guess at that point, you don't really have any option. If it's 10%, you have to do it. It also says it does not have sufficient number of jobs. I'm not sure how you determine that. All I can tell you is in my district, the number one issue that I have day in and day out is how do we get enough people to fill the jobs that we have. These are manufacturing, good jobs, good pay. We can't get enough people. So the other thing it says is on the request of the state agency, the secretary may waive the applicability of paragraph 2 of any group of individuals. So my question is, you know, in light of all of the rhetoric about how we got to get these people back to work and how, you know, that somehow or another the SNAP program is the problem, which I don't buy into, but, you know, is there any effort down in USDA to try to rein in these waivers and to, you know, get people back to work? I mean, if I had my way, we'd give them money and have them move to my district. I'll put them to work. But
thank you, sir. I think within the limits of the law, Mr. Peterson, we are doing everything we can to rein in the waivers. You mentioned some statutory prohibitions there, and anytime we run up against those, in fact, even from a regional basis, it's not a statewide unemployment number, but if they can do that, states have been fairly aggressive. The ones you identified that have waivers, they've been fairly aggressive in requesting those waivers, for which we see no statutory or administrative authority at USDA to deny. And we've discussed it. We don't find a way to do that. That's one of the areas that I think probably that could be addressed in the Farm Bill regarding the parameters around those issues of the waivers. We've had other types of waivers, as you know, that we have denied that, again, as long as it's a federally mandated program, I think it would be very difficult to pick winners and losers in that regard. So we would welcome really more statutory and administrative authority in order to manage that program in a way that becomes temporary and becomes a pathway back to independence and job creations.
Thank you, Thomas. Time has expired. Mr. Thompson, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary, always great to see you. Thank you for spending some time with us in Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago. Greatly appreciated. Topic. Well, I want to talk about the spotted lanternfly, actually, a little different. An invasive species, a growing problem in Pennsylvania, and it's already found in 13 counties, continues to wreak havoc on agriculture producers, landowners. This pests hosts and is a threat to apples, grapes, peaches, stone fruits, dog fruits, maples, walnuts, oaks, pines, hardwoods, a big part of our agriculture economy. Last month at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, members of this committee, along with Undersecretary Greg Eibach, thank you for having him come up and joining us, heard directly about the need for more resources to combat the spread of this destructive invasive. Can you advise on how APHIS plans to assist with this extremely urgent matter?
Well, as we know, there are a lot of pests that are threats internationally. This is a new one. The Florida industry, citrus industry, certainly learned about how those international pests can damage an industry. And you mentioned your fruit crops and grapes and others. The spotted lanternfly is one of those that we hope to get control of. And the good news is Undersecretary Eibach has already approved the resources to get it under control and working with your local people there at Penn State and within the state, and excuse me, in order to try to hem that in and keep the spread. It could be a very critical pest for our fruit and vegetable, our fruit and grape industry in that way, as those affected counties already know. So we're doing our best from APHIS, and Undersecretary Eibach is on the job, and we've approved those resources to try to get control of the spotted lanternfly.
Well, thank you for that. Also, thank you for what you've done with our nation's school lunch programs, specifically appreciative of the interim final rule you produced last year that would allow, among other things, to reinstate low-fat flavored milk. That policy is right in line, obviously, with legislation I've introduced. Is it safe to say that schools can follow the interim final rule to include 1% flavored milk as they put out their bids for the 2018-2019 school year without waiting for the final rule in the fall of 2018?
That's certainly our intention, Mr. Thompson, but the fact is many school districts are reticent over following those kind of waivers, and we would welcome the kind of legislation you propose that could ensure that they could do that. Any kind of waiver process you have is always problematic and more paperwork, and it would be wonderful if it were in statute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
So much time's out. Mr. Acosta, 5 minutes. 3 minutes, excuse me.
Okay, I'll take 5. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I too want to thank you for your efforts and getting around the country and coming to California, and we look forward to continuing to see you. You're doing a good job. Because of the time, I got some quick questions, like some quick answers. As it relates to efforts with the federal milk marketing order in California, some of us worked very hard on that 4 years ago to set that up to allow that opportunity to take place under the right conditions. Right. We're getting upheld by a Solicitor General's opinion on a court decision that is separate, in my opinion, from the matter dealing with this milk marketing order. Can you tell us how you're going to get this resolved? Obviously, if you had made a response before December 31st, it wouldn't be an issue. Where are we?
Right. It's complicated. Obviously, it has to do with the judiciary, the Department of Justice, essentially changing their minds or their opinion regarding whether the administrative law judges are constitutional or not. As you know, the federal milk marketing order have to be under formal comment, which is adjudicated and judged by that.
Is there another way we can deal with this? Are you exploring that?
I've asked my general counsel that way, and he fears until this Lucia case is there, we will be litigated if we proceeded on under that formal comment period.
The dairy industry, as you know, has suffered around the country and as well in California. Obviously, they're very desperate for something to happen on this. What is your plan of action for finalizing the California milk marketing order?
One of the efforts we've made in others, this statute requires this be a formal ALJ type of adjudicated process. The other steps we've taken are the informal notice and comment on other regulations. So until this is determined, I'm not sure what
well, we want to continue to work with you on exploring what other options might be available given the circumstances. Let me segue over to trade. You've been a voice of reason. It's been difficult for many of us to follow what direction the President is pursuing with regards to whether it's TPP or NAFTA. 30% of California's milk goes to Mexico. Mexico and Canada are our second and third largest agricultural trading partners. Where are we? Your quick assessment on NAFTA at this point in time.
You know, NAFTA negotiations are a little bit like congressional bills. It doesn't ever happen.
Don't tell me that.
Until the end. But the good news is I'm more hopeful than I have been. I think probably we see more movement on Mexico's side than we do Canada. I believe, frankly, we'll get a better deal from both of them and preserve the benefits for all three countries.
Before the end of this year?
Yes, sir. I think, again, we've got the Mexican elections coming up. We've got one more round here, which I believe will be, in my opinion, will be extended. But I think, again, we get the Mexican politics out of the way. I think we'll have a deal before the end of the year.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time, and I'll submit other questions
Mr.
for the record.
3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. You and I have discussed the issue of the agricultural workforce a number of times in the past, and we both agree that our current H-2A agricultural guest worker program is deeply flawed. From those conversations we have had with farmers all across this country, it makes sense that a guest worker program should help, not punish farmers who are willing to pay a fair wage for law-abiding, dependable workers when American workers are not available. With the state of the rural economy front and center this morning, unnecessary burdens place H-2A employers at a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace, therefore threatening the future of U.S. agricultural production. Most farmers and ranchers do not even use the program. How do you feel an overhaul of the H-2A program would benefit the rural economy of America?
Chairman Goodland, as we've discussed publicly and privately, I applaud your efforts and your interest in creating a permanent legal workforce for agriculture. As I indicated in my opening remarks, it's one of the top 3 things that we hear about on a continuing basis, not just the seasonal workers, but obviously in the dairy and year-round type workers as well. What you have contributed to this effort is amazing in the fact that what we've told our constituency, I know you're working on some tweaks. It's not everything that all of them would like, and we've got issues from the California transition to others, but I know that we're working on a good resolution on those. But we've advised them to be very favorable in those discussions. I'm very hopeful that it can work into the legal agricultural workforce, can work its way into any of the immigration debate and discussion and resolution that Congress comes up with in the future. So my thanks to you for continuing to put it at the forefront. It's one of the most critical issues, I think, facing American agriculture.
Well, thank you, and we'll continue to work with you and the agricultural community to make sure that we get it right. But now's the time. This is an important issue. This is the one sector of our economy that is the most affected by the lack of a workforce. Agriculture is impacted by international competition. Everything that is grown and produced in America can be produced in dozens of other countries around the world, and unless we have a workforce and a program that works to obtain that workforce, and one that works for both employers and the guest workers and for American citizens, we're going to lose out. And so I'm hoping that we can get that done and get that done now.
I'm very hopeful.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman is back. Ms. Fudge, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Mr. Secretary, do you know if the administration has made any progress towards or even any efforts to nominate an Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights?
Yes, that person is in vetting right now. I think we have an individual you'll be very proud of, and we're moving forward to that. We've been disappointed, frankly, in our nomination process and how slowly it's proceeded. We need a lot of help there, but we've identified, and the President hopefully will have a nomination before you very quickly.
Thank you very much. Let me just go a little further with that. It's my understanding that you recently considered realigning the Office of Civil Rights by combining and centralizing them in D.C. Now, quite frankly, I'm really surprised because we all know that the department does not have a stellar record of civil rights. I mean, we've settled Pigford for black farmers. We've settled Keeps Eagle for Native American farmers. So it is very, very important that we don't make those same mistakes. I understand about budgetary constraints, no question about it. I know that this year we're going to borrow 80% more than we borrowed last year because of lagging tax revenue. I understand that. I also understand that the tax bill that we just passed is going to make that even worse this year. So I understand about resources, but I don't understand why we would punish socially disadvantaged farmers by centralizing something that we know needs to be in the states. Can you help me with that? Are we still talking about doing that?
Sure. We're making a reorganization in many ways over centralization or of enterprise efforts. The good news is, and I would invite you to come to the USDA and let us share with you how we've cleared up the backlog of cases in less than a year, many of them that have been there for 18 months to 2 years. We were outside the statutory limits, and the people that we've had in that situation have cleared those up within that time limit. Our goal is within 90 days over any kind of civil rights case or anything being filed to give any individual externally or internally a hearing and an adjudication of their complaints.
So again, are you still planning to centralize all of the civil rights offices?
We're planning to, again, manage the Department of USDA to be the most efficient, the most effective, and the most customer focused. That includes, again—
Mr. Secretary, is that a yes or a no, sir?
I'm sorry?
Is that a yes or no?
Yes, we are going to enterprise manage that, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Lucas, 5 minutes. 3 minutes. Good grief. Bad habit. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you. It took you all of 11 days to get to my district after you were confirmed and sworn in. And I have 12 quotes on my iPhone from that speech you gave from that hayrack that day. I put them there because I thought it was a composite of wisdom, and it tells me how your philosophy is about running this department. I just wanted to pass this along, that I'm thinking about this labor situation. And I have the answer right here in front of me: more babies and less welfare. But that's a long-term plan, and I want to shift off that topic and not ask you a question on it, and turn to this and say to you in this record today that the nomination of our State Secretary of Agriculture, Bill Northey, to be Undersecretary of Farm Production and Conservation in your department is very important to me. And I'm doing all I can, especially behind the scenes, to try to bring that together so that can be resolved. And I wanted to open that topic up in case you had any comment you'd like to make regarding that subject.
I would encourage you and all your colleagues to help in that regard. This is a very important position. This is the Undersecretary who oversees our FSA offices, our NRCS offices, and the crop insurance. These are the producers. That's the customer-facing issues that we have. We need good leadership there. Bill Northey has demonstrated himself. The frustrating part is it has nothing to do with Bill Northey. It's a total other issue. If there were issues regarding his answers or other things like that, I could accept that more, and we would work to cure that. We feel as if we're caught in a crossfire, so I hope you'll use your personal relationships and in that regard to help us remove that hole as soon as possible.
I will continue that, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate your response. Shifting topics, the foot and mouth disease vaccine, I understand many of us agree on expanding and establishing a vaccine bank. But I wanted to ask you specifically to speak to the issue of genetically modified vaccine and how that might dramatically change the way that we produce a vaccine, how we inventory it, and how we distribute it.
Surely. There are if I can use this term, two strains of thought regarding that right now. One is a traditional vaccine that cannot be produced in the United States of America by statute. We'd have to produce that. Really, the only really effort there is now is in France. That's still a longer term type of thing before they get a line up. The ARS has participated in what's called a leaderless or attenuated vaccine that could be produced here. Many people feel like that's a ways away as well. Honestly, Congressman, that's an issue where I think USDA owes this committee and Congress more specific information and advice and counsel over how you make the decisions of which way to go, certainly from an appropriation. This is not a cheap issue. The money's not there. You've got to find it. And I challenge my team this week to get more specific advice and counsel regarding what recommendations, the pros and cons of each step, so you all can be as informed as you need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. Mr. McGovern, 3 minutes.
Thank you. I thank Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. Mr. Secretary, I am deeply worried about the future of SNAP and our nutrition programs. And I'm worried because, as the ranking Democrat on the Nutrition Subcommittee, we haven't seen a paragraph, a sentence about what might be in the Farm Bill. And that usually tells me that when it comes out, it's going to be something I don't like. And I'm worried because I read in AgriPulse today the chairman of the committee saying that the Freedom Caucus will be very happy with the so-called reforms on SNAP. We have no idea what they're going to be. I'm assuming that the USDA is working with the majority on this committee and in drafting the Farm Bill. And if you are, maybe you can give us a copy of what we're supposed to be dealing with. I don't think it's a classified document. But if I will just say that I want a Farm Bill just as much as everybody else does on this committee, but if it eviscerates our nutrition programs, our SNAP programs, there's going to be one hell of a fight on the floor. Last year, you said when you came before the committee, and you were new, and I quote, the SNAP is a very effective program and that you didn't want to fix things that aren't broken. And it was music to my ears. Yet a couple of weeks later, the administration's budget came out and it was $193 billion in cuts in the program. Now, to be fair, you had just started, so that wasn't your work. I hope that we get an assurance that we won't see those kind of cuts today when the new budget comes out.
But then you also, I saw the USDA's farm principles in which you advocate for legislation that will support work. We all support work, but I'm just wondering what the specifics of that might be. And then you said that, you know, that SNAP, you don't want SNAP to become a permanent lifestyle for some, and all the numbers show that that's not the case. That even with able-bodied adults without dependents, that the time on the program is relatively short. So I'm worried about some of these words because they have meanings sometimes that justify deep cuts in this program that might throw people off. So any kind of assurance you can give us that we're not going to see in an administration budget deep cuts in SNAP, or that the administration will not stand for this committee coming up with a farm bill that would have deep cuts in the SNAP program.
Well, certainly, Congressman. Our role at USDA, and we'd be happy to visit with you specifically as well, as we do all members, to talk about ideas of where we feel like we can inform you and give you counsel and advice of the farm program. Obviously, the role of this committee and Congress in general is to write the farm bill. Our goal is advice and counsel in those areas of where we see some advantages. We do believe, you may be looking at different statistics than I am, but obviously we believe that work for those people who are able is a transition to a more independent lifestyle.
And the majority of people who can work actually do work who are on SNAP. And I guess my point is simply that if you have any influence with the majority in this committee, please get them to release the text so that we can actually look at it and know what we're going to be voting on, and to find out whether it's going to adversely impact the most vulnerable amongst our society.
I'll speak to the chairman right after this meeting.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Scott, 5 minutes. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, always good to see you. We've had a lot of discussions about a lot of things. I want to talk with you briefly about rural broadband. And as you know, the digital divide is one of the things that we've got to bridge as we talk about the rural economy. How do we get industries to prosper there, whether they be large or small? And obviously, access to the digital infrastructure of the country is one of the most important things. Right now, USDA and the FCC both have programs to assist rural broadband deployment. Can you speak to the coordination between the two agencies, and if there are any improvements that could be made? And as we begin working on the infrastructure package, what suggestions do you have for improved access to the underserved areas without overbuilding or duplicating services?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Scott. I think this, again, could be one of the most transformative things we do in the 21st century regarding ubiquitous broadband, to allow everyone from wherever they may live in the United States to participate in the modern data-driven economy. We are, again, working with FCC. We're working with Department of Commerce in the Rural Prosperity Task Force. We made it a good one of the primary points. The good news is the administration, the White House, has picked up on this, and we are now working with the Center of Innovation out of the White House and trying to focus and understand from a census of where all the federal dollars are and how they can be, again, concentrated in an effective way, not only just for federal dollars, but in the infrastructure bill to leverage with state and local dollars. Many states already have ideas about this, as well as the private sector. We see, we were just, our Administrator of Rural Utility Services and Rural Development was just announced. He's a former electric co-op president who led in Missouri, in a very less than dense area, a profitable transition in that. We think there are a lot of partners out here that could be effective, not in a hothouse type of environment, but a general strategic goal of broadband everywhere. It's got sociological input, it's got economic benefits for e-commerce, it's got telemedicine, distance learning, all those kind of things, plus the sociological benefits of keeping those kids in areas where they would love to live.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your service. I hope that as you continue to serve, we'll remember the hard times we had with the federal agencies in trying to run the state of Georgia, and hopefully get those barriers out of the way where we can remove the barriers and get the government closer to the people. So thank you for your service. He was a great governor, and he's going to be a great Secretary of Ag.
Gentleman's time expired. Ms. Custer, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary, and thank you again for coming to New Hampshire. We had a wonderful meeting with you, and I appreciate it. I'm going to cut right to the chase. You and I had a nice colloquy last time you came about your experience with the Appalachian Regional Commission. In my part of the country, the Northern Border Regional Commission is crucial for our rural development. And I'm very concerned that that has been eliminated from the proposed budget. I just want to cite a couple of things that are happening in my district, financing the construction of a 32-bed treatment facility for our opioid epidemic in a town called Bethlehem, New Hampshire. Crucial. This is the northern part of my district. No other treatment facilities available. We've created, we are in the process of constructing affordable housing units for veterans in Plymouth, New Hampshire. We opened a new health facility in Bristol, New Hampshire. Crucial funding for our infrastructure in rural communities. Can you make a commitment to me today that you will help us get the funding for the Northern Borders Regional Commission?
Well, again, I will commit to you that rural development and the USDA will do all that we can in these areas to help. Obviously, I wish that I were in charge of the whole budget, but I'm not. And obviously, there's an organization called OMB that has a lot of say in that. We try to advise and counsel them as well, but oftentimes they don't listen as well to us as we'd like for them to in that regard. But certainly for the needs, as you indicated, I saw firsthand the beneficiary of the Appalachian Regional Commission. I know what these can do, but we also are committed and dedicated to making sure rural development in these kind of spaces, whether it's treatment facilities, transition facilities, or the other things that you mentioned, still is a strong participant in our rural and our communities, whether it be the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, or the Northwest, and all across America.
Thank you. And just a heads up to my colleagues, I have bipartisan support from my Republican colleagues and Democratic colleagues. I hope this will be in the underlying Farm Bill. If not, I'll be back with an amendment. So thank you. And just very briefly, could you comment about rural broadband deployment? That was an issue we talked about when you were in New Hampshire, in 30 seconds.
Certainly. We're working feverishly, actually, with not only the FCC, Department of Commerce, other partners where billions of federal dollars are already going, but with our state and local partners as well as our private sector partners in trying to develop a nationwide strategy for deployment of that. We believe, again, as I indicated to Congressman Scott, that I think it could be one of the most transformative things we do in America for the 21st century. You look at the federal highway interstate system, you look at the REA, you look at the telephone system. That's what we need today, and we're working toward that.
Well, thank you, and I'd love to work with you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Gibbs, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. 3 minutes, I know. Hey, thank you, Secretary, for being here. It's great to see you again. I have a question in regard to what happened in the tax bill, and you may or may not be familiar, but hopefully you have some comment on it. In the Senate, they Section 199, and they created a new Section 199A, and it's causing an issue with farmer co-ops and other grain elevators, and it's because of the 20% deduction for co-ops, and then the tax rate is on gross, but it's, I know the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives and the National NGA, National Grain Feed Association are trying to work together to fix this in the Senate, because it originated in the Senate. Because it does kind of pick winners and losers, and it's really going to hurt our small businesses that buy grain from farmers and other things. So can you comment on that, or do you see what's happening? Or
Yes, sir. We're on the record, obviously, early on after that came out, and it was acknowledged some of the inadvertent consequences of the language in the 199A is that we felt like that was unintended consequences, and we would love to see a resolution as quickly as possible. It was going to affect the marketing of various crops, and we hope and I trust that the cooperative community as well as the independent community are working together on a fair resolution. We wanted to see the previous provisions of 199 preserved, and I think that was really the intent of Congress, but kind of moved the meter a little too far. Yep. Hopefully we can get back in there in an effort where we don't see the diminishment of what the previous 199 provisions were, but certainly what happened was a very unfair advantage, and probably everyone, I think, whether you're a co-op or not, recognize that.
Well, I think the good news is the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives and the National Grain Feed Association are working together, because they would kind of be maybe on both sides of the issue there, and so I think that's positive. I had apologize. I had to step out, and I just caught the end of Representative Scott's comments on the broadband. I'll just say, because I'm running out of time, but I totally agree with you 150%. We need to get broadband deployed in the rural areas. And, you know, one vehicle might be working with some of the electric co-ops. I have a couple of electric co-ops in my state of Ohio, and I noticed in Indiana that have actually tried to lay fiber and do that. So I think the possibilities that needs to happen, we're kind of like we were probably when President Eisenhower did the interstate highway system. This is the new economic development in rural America that has to happen.
I agree.
I yield back.
Yields back. Ms. Adams, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Our 1890 land-grant universities play an important role in the rural economy, many in rural districts in the South, where they are among the largest employers in their towns. The 1890s contribute $4.4 billion to their local economies, but as you know, Mr. Secretary, more than half of our 1890s are not getting 1-1 matches from their states. In my home state, North Carolina A&T provides extension services in 51 of our 100 counties, and is doing a good job in helping our farmers and the community, but they're not getting their state match. And so I understand that as governor, you helped Fort Valley State to get 1-1 matches. We need your leadership in USDA and to ensure that all of our 1890s receive their funding. So how can we work with states to encourage them to act more equitably when providing a match? And what did you do in Georgia to make it work?
I think, again, it's a recognition of the contribution that our 1890 schools, land-grant schools, have. We were fortunate in Georgia with Fort Valley State that they had great programs that were recognized. We visited around. We were at Florida A&M, and I was really amazingly surprised at the amount of scientific research those students were doing there. Was quite an indication of the good work that's being done. One of the things that we're working on with your colleague, Congressman David Scott, my friend from Georgia, is a bill, his bill, H.R. 51. We've been discussing with the White House how we can enhance through scholarships some of that. The challenge is, obviously, from a state perspective and state budgets, we're somewhat constrained by how we can influence that other than encouragement over them matching the federal dollars there. There's a tendency, obviously, among education and research when the states, when the federal government moves a step forward, sometimes our local governments move 2 steps backward. And we can't continue to backfill that with more funding, but we can also be helpful. We've created the Office of Partnership and Public Engagement that's reinvigorating our USDA relationship with our 1890 schools as well as our tribal colleges as well.
Okay. Let me just quickly ask you about centers of excellence and what your thoughts are on that. You know, we had just a temporary project, and so what's your thought about creating centers of excellence and moving them forward?
Would you repeat that question? I'm not quite sure I understood.
Well, centers of excellence, 3 of them were started and with only discretionary funding, and we haven't had any permanent centers, and I was just wondering about that.
I don't know that I have a specific answer for you. I'll get one for you on the centers of excellence.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Julie's time's expired. Mr. Crawford, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had the opportunity to visit with you a little bit about some of the challenges of young farmers and ranchers and some of the barriers to how they can enter production agriculture. Farm Bill principles, one of them states is to encourage entry into farming through increased access to land and capital for young, beginning, veteran, and underrepresented farmers. What do you think we can do from a policy perspective to help facilitate that? Because it's a huge challenge, and we're really not moving the needle very measurably.
Sure. I think one of the things that Ranking Member Peterson and I have talked about is making sure that our CRP programs don't outbid land higher than rental rates for keeping it away from the beginning farmers many times. I think another policy, we need to look at the indexing of our farm loans. As you know, it's the access to capital is very important. There's another statutory provision regarding direct farm loans and FSA is that beginning farmers have to have 3 years of experience. And I think we need to look at how we can modify that and make sure that we do good underwriting on that. But particularly in the Northeast, we've seen a lot of young entrepreneur farmers, not necessarily from farm background, getting in, and we need to be more mindful of how we can facilitate those types of efforts.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit with you here. Not that long ago, been about a year or so ago, when you were confirmed and you mentioned in your Senate confirmation hearing we should have Cuba as a customer. They would love our products. I agree with that quite a bit. I would ask you if you could kind of give me a bit of a read on the administration's perspective with regard to ag trade in Cuba, specifically legislative efforts like H.R. 525 to affect that.
Yeah. I think, again, from the administration's perspective, I don't know that a lot has changed regarding ag trade. In fact, if you look at the statistics, our ag trade in Cuba this past year went up significantly. Poultry and other products went up fairly significantly to Cuba. So I think as Cuba has always been, it's mostly a cash flow issue, it's a payment issue, and that obviously, whatever Congress wants to do in that way, but we're shipping ag products to Cuba. Again, it's a very good logistical play for us, and they again, as I said in the testimony, they love the products and would love more of them. It's a matter of how they pay for it.
Is it correct? Is there a sense among other your peers in the administration, your counterparts, say at Commerce and Treasury, that they might accept a change to the statute that allows for the financing of those transactions?
I haven't had specific conversations. I think early on the President's comments regarding Cuba may make that problematic at this point, but we haven't addressed that specifically.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Mr. Soto, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, in Central Florida and around the country, we're developing new high-tech sensors and photonics technology. And in your January 8th, 2018 report to the President from the Task Force of Agriculture and Rural Prosperity, a task force you chaired, the task force recommended increasing research and use of precision agriculture technology, specifically sensors and imagery technology. Can you elaborate on the Department of Agriculture support for expanded research in sensors, image technology, and other smart ag technologies?
Well, I believe that technology, research, and advancement has been really the result of our productivity, or the precursor to our productivity here to now. When we see other countries, both in the EU and China and other people, putting more and more money into research, it's important that we continue that. The great news about the overall ecosystem that we have of delivery of information in the United States is we've got a great basic research through our land-grant universities, the 1890s and others, include over basic research, the kind of what-if questions. We've got great applied research ecosystem of how that really affects what happens in the fields and the farms and the forest out there. And then we've got this great delivery system of extension service that helps that. USDA and the federal government all participate in that in a great way. We just got to make sure that we continue to focus it. USDA, as you well know, has the Agricultural Research Service that works very closely with our other independent researchers in our universities across the campus. So I can't say forcefully enough how important that is to continue our research efforts, both on the kind of pests that we have, like the spotted lanternfly, the greening issues there, and other types of things. Research will be the solution. I think when you look at the productivity trends of the American farmer and rancher, that's what's contributed to their success, and it's not a time to stop now, because we've got other nations who are rapidly catching up on research appropriations.
And we appreciate you being a champion of fighting citrus greening as our neighbor to the north from Georgia. Florida continues to have issues. What commitments can we count on going into the rest of 2018 and 19 with regard to combating citrus greening?
I think one of the things we've been waiting on, obviously, is the disaster supplemental, which could have a huge impact over that. We know that Florida citrus industry was devastated at a point there, so we're anxious to see how that can flow into what permanent solutions we can make. There had been some progress, and the hurricane kind of set people back in that progress, but the Florida citrus industry had, I thought, was really kind of getting up on the plane, having the devastation of the last 10 years, but then understanding the kind of things. APHIS will continue to work with them over the things that really matter, and hopefully our disaster supplemental appropriation can help as well.
Thank you, Unyield Black.
Jim's time expired. Mr. Davis for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to see you again. I have to commend you and your staff for listening whenever we've had a concern and acting on those concerns. So thank you once again. In USDA's 2018 Farm Bill and Legislative Principles document, the department mentions the need to develop an impact evaluation approach to ag research. I agree with the need for such a system, and I actually plan on introducing legislation soon to ensure the research we are conducting is research that's most needed. What additional changes can Congress make to better improve ag research to make our ag research dollars go further?
I think, again, we're looking at different focuses on priority issues. Just as you mentioned, we looked at some of the things that NIFA had funded in the past and caused some consternation among myself. From a Congress perspective, I don't know that I'd like to encourage you to be more specific about that, but again, hold me accountable to make sure the research we are funding through USDA contributes directly to the productivity for the American farmer rancher and for resolving the most difficult issues and problems out there. And that's, I think that's a management issue. It's hard to, if you find things we're not addressing, then we want to hear about that. But I think that's very hard, difficult and challenging to be specific enough in statutory language because the dynamic of problems changes. And we need to be flexible as we move forward in researching those issues, just like the spotted lanternfly, which had just recently appeared, then we need research to help us there. So I love the flexibility, but also want you to hold us accountable for us doing the most needful type of research available.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Since I have not a lot of time left, I'm just going to make a couple comments. As chairman of the Congressional Biofuels Caucus, biofuels and the RFS are very important to my farmers and to my district, and I would hope that you can be a strong biofuels advocate in this administration. And again, greatly appreciate all you're doing at USDA. RUS, I know there's been a lot of discussion on rural broadband. I guess my comment would be as we move ahead, can we ensure that the USDA and the Rural Utility Service can go back to some of the projects that they funded in the past and make sure that those companies that have been taking those dollars and leveraging them with RUS loans are actually being able to provide the service that they've promised, especially as we go into more fiber necessities in just our average everyday home life? And can we ensure that if they're not providing that service, that we might open it up for more competition to be able to leverage those RUS dollars from companies that will provide that new fiber-related service? Thank you.
Yes, sir. I would welcome that again from an outcome kind of based person, and if we're delivering grants or loans in a way, then we need to have a quality control audit that makes sure we're getting what we're paying for.
Jim's time's expired. Ms. Blunt Rochester for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
We want to thank you on behalf of the First State for coming to visit us and being a part of our state fair. It was a highlight that people are still talking about. I wanted to, you had an opportunity to see some of rural Delaware, and one of the major issues that faces us, like many other states, is the issue of the opioid epidemic. Delaware is actually, according to the CDC, we are the 8th in drug overdose death rates. And so I wanted to focus a little bit on that and what USDA is doing. You guys have a portal, which I'm not sure if you're aware, but that opioid portal is not working. And I know that in the FSA, NRCS, and rural development offices, you would have pamphlets, and I'm not sure if you still do, but Could you talk a little bit about what resources, support, or jurisdiction you feel are insufficient for right now, and then what you think Congress can do to assist in that?
Certainly. Well, first of all, I appreciate you pointing out the fact that we've got a portal at a USDA website that's not functioning. I'm a little embarrassed by that, and I think you'll go back and check in the next couple of days. That should be resolved. But what we're trying to do, again, is to coordinate between our federal partners and HHS, who has the primary responsibility here. How does USDA impact that? We know from RD perspective, rural development, many of these issues, unlike other drug issues, are probably in many rural areas, and whether it's transition centers, treatment facilities, or those kind of things, we've got an aggressive approach through rural development to help local communities and address their needs in that. This is a terrible type of situation that is somewhat, frankly, difficult for easy answers, but we want to participate with our federal partners. From Congress' perspective, again, I think the awareness and acknowledgement is the first thing, and any types of ideas that you have that USDA can implement better, then we're open to hearing from that.
Fantastic. This is one of the areas that I can say there's a lot of bipartisan support on. Annie Custer, Congresswoman Custer, has been one of the leaders as well. And so that's the one question. The other that I'll submit in writing, because we might not have enough time, is I just would love to hear an update on your restructuring. The last time you were here, we talked about that. And I'd love to hear specifically what things you hope to achieve and whether or not you actually achieved those things in the restructuring.
That's a good question. We'd love to tell you very specifically and in length where we've been and what we've done.
Great. Thank you.
All right, your lady's time has expired. Mr. Boss, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, back here. You know, Representative Davis actually touched on this slightly, but I want to go into more detail. You know, the domestic energy production continues to rise in the United States, and the use of renewable fuels are helping the U.S. take steps towards energy independence. Renewable fuels and RFS are extremely important to the district I represent. They provide good-paying jobs, added value commodities, alternative feedstock, and in some instances, new opportunities for capitalizing on investments in research and development made in advance of biofuels like cellulosic. Can you tell us where the USDA is, what it's doing to further improve opportunities in the renewable fuels area?
Surely. We've had a lot of discussions here based a lot on the challenge of the hold of our undersecretary in that area, which that seems to be the real issue there. One of the things that we've looked at, I visited actually yesterday with the chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission about a more transparent market of RINs that may help to understand where the RIN trading is going. One of the things I've had a discussion with about our EPA administrator is the RVP waiver going from 10 to 15%. I've tried to get the industry to look at further than just 2022 when the statutory volumes disappear. How can we build in a demand base moving from 10% to 15% there, helping with our energy independence? I think some of this from a natural gas perspective and both a oil perspective, many people have lost some of the enthusiasm they had when the RFS guidelines were put in. It's obviously been good for American energy independence as well as for the American farmer. We just want to help facilitate a movement further there into the RVP waiver of 15%.
Thank you. I want to switch gears if I can. I'm down on time here, but you know, we've previously discovered bringing our waterways into the 21st century. My district kind of unique. It's one of the only districts in the nation that has 3 navigable waterways: the Ohio, the Mississippi, and the Kaskaskia River. The locks and dams and the thousands of miles that are up and down the inland waterways. The concerns I have with the levees, not only the levees, but also the locks and dams and maintenance and everything. What are you doing, and the concern, maybe to express the concerns you might have as we try to move our grain and biofuels as our commodities, because when we compete in a worldwide market, if we move forward with the infrastructure bill, my big fear is what the fees that are put in place will put us in a disadvantage.
Well, certainly, one of the things we've benefited from in the United States of America is a great logistical system, of which inland waterways are part of it, as well as our ports. And I think you've heard the President stand on the banks of the Ohio River and talk about that crumbling infrastructure. Some of those locks and dams are over 50 years old. So I'm hopeful that in the infrastructure bill, we'll see dedicated money for agricultural logistical services, including those that you described.
Thank you very much.
Time has expired. Mr. Scott, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think I'm on. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Secretary Perdue, as always, it's a pleasure. Let me commend you on the excellent job you're doing. I think you visited, what, 32, 33 states already? And that's wonderful. And I just want to commend you for that. And I also want to thank you for your work with me and other members of this committee on the House Resolution 51, which would help to be able to address the issue of getting more young people into farming, into agriculture. It is the world's most important industry. Clothes we eat, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, our comfort level for our homes, our clothes. So this is very important that we be able to get scholarships in to these schools. And these are very, very important schools. The 1890s, which are the African-American land-grant schools and colleges. And, of course, they may be African-American, but they have students from every single race. So it's a beautiful, beautiful thing we're doing. And I deeply appreciate you talking to President Trump about this. And give him my regards, won't you? And tell him I thank him for our support. It's going to take a team effort to do that, and we're very delighted with that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, friend.
Now,
we've suggested this February might be a good time to get that H.R. 51 across the line.
Oh, we hope so, man. We'll be pushing.
Before
you're the running back that can get it through from your days at the University of Georgia.
While you were out, I mentioned the fact of my visit to Florida A&M, an alma mater, and how impressed I were with the students. If you could have seen the research projects that those students do, and they would equal any land-grant university in the country. So I know you'd be proud. Your colleague, Mr. Lawson, was there with us, and
good.
We were happy to be there.
If it weren't for Florida A&M, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Right.
Thanks to that fine university. And, of course, it is a land-grant school, and I know they're grateful for your work on House Resolution 51. Let me lift up in my last 15 seconds. I'm concerned about cotton. I want to make sure we're able to get that cost share program and get the financial help to our cotton farmers that we need. As you know, Georgia's number 2 in cotton, next to my good friend, Mr. Conway's Texas. Are we?
Right. We had worked on that prior to really after the hurricanes, kind of in the midst of your all's discussion regarding the disaster supplemental. We had a pay-go solution in that. We still have that prepared to go for the 16 crop. We were advised to sort of wait and see how the disaster supplemental goes. It looks like if it continues to go on and not be funded, then we may have to go ahead with the cost share program there. But that would be for the 16 crop in that way. So we have something in the pipe ready to go, and it's a matter of timing on that.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time expired. Mr. Abraham, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Perdue, thanks for being here. Thanks for allowing and facilitating the USDA to be more customer service related, certainly more responsive to requests. It's been a delightful turn of events. Thanks for coming to Louisiana, talking to my rice and sugar, cotton and corn farmers there. It's much appreciated. And I'm going to kind of pony on Mr. Scott's statements as far as cotton. As we know, the 2014 to the 2016, even the 17 years have been tough on cotton. We're to the point in Louisiana where production costs are about $100 more than actual revenue costs. So it's a net loss situation. So we understand with Chairman Conway's leadership, I think we'll address that in the Farm Bill and make some steps to at least remedy some of that, because there's such an urgent need. And I'm grateful for your commitment, as Mr. Scott has alluded to, for the short time reliefs for our 2016 and our 2017 cotton producers, mainly for the fact that they can simply still go to the bank and be bankable for another year. And as you know, having been a grower yourself, that is critical to be able to walk into a bank and obtain a loan just to put a crop in the ground. And your opening statement of how optimistic our farmers are when they know the odds are against them was a testament to their courage and their willpower. So again, just a thanks for what you're doing and looking after all our farmers. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Jim yields back. Mr. Evans, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to thank you for the recognition of Saul Agricultural School and the future farmers, and you raised the highlight on that. I really appreciate that. I know you're a veterinarian, and I'm concerned we have University of Penn and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Can you share with me the importance of veterinarian programs that you look to strengthen as it relates to the nation's veterinarians?
Well, certainly, I think if I understand the question, USDA employs a lot of veterinarians. Yes. They're at the forefront of our food safety program and very critical in that. My short time in the Air Force, that was really my job, was public health and food safety. So obviously the veterinary education aspect from how we can encourage that, particularly in the food animal medicine perspective. Many people, as you well know from your constituents, it's difficult to get a large or a food animal veterinarians in many parts of the country today. So I think we ought to look at, again, some scholarships similar to we have with medical students, where they go and practice in areas that are needed and vital, that where they get some, again, loan forgiveness in those areas. So as a veterinarian, I'm very close to that community and anxious. I may have told you this before, but we actually funded my wife and I endowed a scholarship at the University of Georgia for students in the Department of Agriculture who want to go into food animal medicine, because it's a critical need, and our ranchers and producers need that.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I was at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, just like as you've been visiting one of the best farm shows in the nation. Dairy farmers, the marginal protection program is not providing the need. Is there anything that the USDA can do through administrative actions to improve this vital safety net for our dairy farmers?
Well, again, what we did do this fall was to allow farmers who had signed up for the margin protection program to withdraw from that. And I think by the virtue of the number of that withdrew, 75% of those, it gave us an indication this program wasn't working for them. I know Ranking Member Peterson and I have had some discussions about how to improve that program. I think, again, that can really vitally needed in the Farm Bill coming forward about how we utilize that program, whether it's margin protection or LGM program for dairy producers. That's the sector, as we indicated, that didn't fare as well in the 14 Farm Bill as we would hope for.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back to balance my time.
Jimmy, just back. Dr. Marshall, 3 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, let me start by saying thank you for your comments on the 199A. Like you, we're all looking for a solution that's fair to all concerned, so greatly appreciate that. I want to address the biggest problem in Kansas. And I say not agriculture, but the biggest problem in Kansas, because Kansas is agriculture and agriculture is Kansas. The biggest problem in Kansas is the price of wheat, the price of sorghum, the price of corn, the price of milk, the price of beef, and the price of pork. And if you've addressed NAFTA already, please take the rest of my time and address what you're seeing the future looks like in Japan. It's a huge market for our wheat and our beef. It's a $200 million problem going forward with our competitors when it comes to the wheat issues as these tariffs come in place. And I want you to be reassured, I interviewed 10 people from Japan and they all preferred Kansas beef over Australian beef. So it's 10 out of 10 people. So we'd like to get that Kansas beef over there.
I understand. I think, again, you may have heard, and I was very encouraged to hear our president at Davos talk about a potential interest in rejoining TPP. As we know, the TPP 11 have moved forward, but when we talk to Japan, when we look at the other countries involved in TPP, I think they were very regretful that the United States was not part of that. And I'm going to take the president at his word. Again, he's a tough negotiator. He's American, and he believes in America. But I think, again, we understand how vital trade is to our ag economy, not just in Kansas, but virtually everywhere else. But the wheat has not fared that well. We were on a good roll with sorghum. I never thought I'd see sorghum at a premium to corn, and that's why the hit took place with China. Even announcement there was disheartening in that regard. NAFTA, as I indicated earlier, I'm hopeful that we can really close that out and have an improved NAFTA, a modernized NAFTA that's better for the American producers as well as we go forward. But our farmers need certainty. They're optimistic, they're resilient, they're courageous, but they need, like any business, they really deal in certainty. And there's a lot of trade anxiety out there. So I wish there were some way the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture could just wave a magic wand and fix prices. You and I both know that's not possible, but you're absolutely right. The farmer is great for the ag economy. It's great for the economy in general, because if farmers make money, they're going to spend money, and they rotate it through the economy in a mighty way. You see that green paint riding everywhere, as well as other things, but it's good for Main Street. The ag economy in those rural Kansas communities is good for Main Street as well.
Thank you for the hope, and I yield back.
Jim's time expired. Mr. Panetta. I'm sorry, Stacy. Yeah, Ms. Panetta. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Yeah, Jimmy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, good morning. Thank you for being here, as always, as we're coming up on the 2018 Farm Bill, and obviously appreciated meeting you out in California. Although, please know that the Salad Bowl is always welcome, has an open welcome for you to come there on the Central Coast of California as well. And if you go there, you're going to hear the #1 issue that's out there on the Central Coast, and probably the #1 issue in California when it comes to our agriculture, and that is labor, as you mentioned. You have shown a great deal of empathy and understanding when it comes to this issue and how it affects our specialty crops on the Central Coast and in California. And I appreciate what you've said, and I appreciate some of the actions that you have taken. I appreciate the fact that you've hired a senior advisor, Christy Boswell, to address these issues. And what I'd like to find out is, as we know, immigration reform, dealing with this issue is very politically sensitive and policy complex. But has Ms. Boswell given you any sort of advice on how we can think outside the box in dealing with addressing our workforce issue? And I know that in your Task Force on Ag and Rural Prosperity report, page 29, you talked about the H-2A. I think that's the only area in that report that you deal with labor in agriculture. And you talked about you mentioned interagency efforts to improve H-2A. My second question would be then, can you elaborate on those interagency efforts as well?
Certainly. As you mentioned, Christy Boswell, we've worked diligently with Chairman Goodlatte on his bill. Obviously, that was one of the issues your Western growers didn't address many of the challenges they have. That's the transition from their current workforce into a new program here. And that's one of the things we'd like to see addressed. We are working with DHS and helping them to understand that the criminals they're looking for are not on our farms. They're out there producing food for the Americans as well as worldwide, and they are not there. It's a challenge, obviously, because as the agents show up, it affects everyone in the community. What you know and I know is that many of these workers have been on some of these farms for years. They become part of the family. In fact, many of them have very serious management responsibilities in that. So I would love to see some sort of transition environment where we could recognize that and move toward a legal workforce. The problem with H-2A, it involves certainly Department of Labor, Department of Homeland Security, as well as state. Now, some of the ideas that Chairman Goodlatte has in his bill we embrace. We think that farmers typically would be more comfortable as an intake mechanism of USDA rather than DOL. There are a lot of very onerous moving parts dealing with the H-2A program, and many of your producers have given up using that as a tool. That only contributes to, the perpetuation of the non-legal workforce that we have in America, and we'd love to see that resolved.
Thank you.
Yep, Jim's time's expired. Mr. Dunn, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today, and thank you for your commitment in your recent 2018 Farm Bill principles to make America's forests work again. The district I represent has many counties that are dependent on working forests to fuel their economy, and so I promise you that in addition to promoting sound management of working forests, I'm going to look forward to working with your department on legislation such as the Timber Innovation Act to spur innovation in the forestry sector and to grow those markets. On another note, as you know, the Food and Drug Administration regulates products of animal biotechnology. Regrettably, over the last 20 years, the FDA has managed to approve just 2 animals. The developers of the GE salmon first applied for FDA approval in 1995 and received that in 2015, 20 years later. The producers of GE mosquitoes applied for FDA field trials in 2011, did not get approval to do those trials until the Zika outbreak came out in 2016. So this undertow of the FDA's regulatory regime is preventing potential products like avian influenza resistant poultry and hoof and mouth resistant cattle from being commercialized. Can you tell us if the USDA plans to engage the FDA on their broken animal biotech system, and have you or has the USDA ever considered seeking to regulate the animal biotech products in-house?
You mentioned 2 issues close to my heart. Obviously, one is the forestry issue. And to make forests work again, we strongly need the legislation that's before Congress now. We need both sides to come together, not only with fire funding, but also with forest management, where we can actually do that. Without the forest management proposals, the funding doesn't really matter. We're going to continue to fight forest fires. So I hope you and your colleagues can ask your leadership to make sure we get that done here quickly. I think there's a window of opportunity that's passing on that. So in order to make forests work again, we need those tools. You mentioned a really interesting issue. We've just signed an agreement with FDA over cooperation. Dr. Gottlieb and I have visited on a fairly regular basis on different areas. This is one particular that's not come up over the veterinary regulation of veterinary approvals, but I love your last suggestion. I think, again, from a pharmaceutical perspective dealing with animals, we'd love to have that responsibility. While FDA, we're making progress on a personal level there, there are embedded attitudes in all these agencies that sometimes don't have the same desire for collaboration that the leadership does. Dr. Gottlieb and I think, are becoming fast friends over the kind of things that we can talk about, but particularly FSMA and those types of issues. But this is one area that I've not pursued, but you've given me another idea.
I'll help you.
Gentleman's time expired. Ms. Plaskett, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us here. The supplemental appropriation bill for disaster relief that the House passed before adjournment included $2.6 billion for crops, trees, bushes, vines, etc., losses due to the 2017 hurricanes, including Irma and Maria. In order to be eligible for funding, all producers receiving payment must purchase crop insurance. And it says where, quote, crop insurance is available for the next 2 available crop years, and producers receiving payments shall be required to purchase coverage under the non-insured crop disaster assistance program. And that's to be determined by the Secretary. As you may know, I don't know if you're aware, USDA does not offer crop insurance in the Virgin Islands, which of course receive enormous damage during the hurricanes. If this bill is approved by the Senate and signed into law, would it be possible, and would you be willing to use the discretion provided to you under this program to help producers in the Virgin Islands purchase coverage under NAP so that they may be eligible for their share of this funding that has been put in the disaster aid package?
I think that's absolutely the intent of the legislation as you read, and we would certainly commit to that when you read the fact that where crop insurance is not available, that's exactly what we would expect to have happen.
That would be great. I appreciate that. Agriculture and rural in the Virgin Islands, and what actions has the department taken to get more USDA expert staff to help the badly damaged agricultural sector there, where lack of technical assistance has been an issue even before the 2 Category 5 hurricanes?
I don't know that I can answer specifically other than committing to you that we will look at that from a data-driven perspective. Our statistical service, we rely on data quite a bit. We talk about being facts-based, data-driven. We can't make good decisions if we don't have good data. So I'll have to look at that and see how we can improve our efforts in our territories.
We'd appreciate that. It's been a real issue for us over the years.
Gentlelady's time expired. I hate to be abrupt, but they've called votes, and we're trying to get everybody through before we go over there. So thank you for that. Mr. Lamalfa for 3 minutes. And again, we're going to be pretty tight on the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Mr. Secretary, I really appreciate your accessibility and your diligence in traveling the country and hearing all our issues. A lot of effort on broadband, greatly appreciated. Bringing it back to some California issues, we produce some of the highest quality food and the safest handled food in the country. And so when you look at the FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, I'm afraid that might be a little more than what is needed. Yes, we had a flare-up over 10 years ago with in the spinach and some of the other leafy greens where E. coli, in some cases some salmonella came up, and so that's being addressed. But what I'm afraid of is that the bureaucracy of the issue is going to go so far that we're going to continue to hamper the ability to grow these products in California or the U.S. effectively. You know, when you're talking about bird droppings, which, I mean, folks, these things grow outside, okay, and not allowing the food to touch the soil from which it came. It seems, again, the bureaucracy might be overreacting to what had been a serious problem, but I think the protocols in place, we've seen pretty good success since then. So, Mr. Secretary, I guess we can go a couple different ways on this. We can see how the new regulations are going to indeed impact growers in our states, or maybe trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit and fix the problems preemptively that could flare up and still have a very safely grown product. So my understanding, most of the authority for the produce safety rule were indeed given over to HHS and to FDA. I think some of us like to see USDA have a lot wider role in that, since you all understand farms and that more directly. And I know that you've been really working for regulatory relief. So is there anything Congress can do legislatively to help, in the Farm Bill more immediately that could make your job? And I know Dr. Gottlieb over there with the FDA as a commissioner has been really working well and trying to work through this path. What best thing can we do to get this to be a more farmer-friendly and USDA-friendly process?
Sir, I couldn't agree with your concern more. It's been one of my major concerns as we look at how we create and produce a safe food supply. I think we probably overpegged the meter a little bit with the Food Safety Modernization Act. You mentioned bird droppings. I mean, people have been written up for deer tracks out in the fields as well. These are not biological, sanitary, sterile conditions over which these vegetables are grown. Again, as you know, Congress gave the Food and Drug Administration the primary oversight of that. And I think while Food and Drug Administration does a lot of good things, they're not experts on the field, in the field of examination. There are a lot of challenges that Dr. Gottlieb is trying to delay. I would welcome Congress to look at this again, see if there's any opportunity in the Farm Bill to rebalance what is the balance between safety and productivity here. No farmer produces a crop intentionally to harm people or handle it in a way to do that. But some of the regulations are, as we're in this deregulatory environment, it's going to be a huge regulatory issue. I'm a little bit concerned that some of the unintended consequences of FSMA may move us into the same area as the Endangered Species Act.
these countries like Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea? Are there representatives from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office? What exactly is the process?
Well, the way it works is the USDA Undersecretary Ted McKinney, who is the Foreign Agricultural Services there, he's our chief salesperson. Now, it's I've used this metaphor before. It's a little bit like some banks today. They got salespeople and they got credit people. So Ted McKinney is our salesperson. Ambassador Lighthouse is our credit check. And so they actually do the legal negotiation of the deals, but we're out there trying to get interest worldwide. Ted McKinney's hit the ground running. He's a great professional. I think he's already logged 30,000 miles there internationally and domestically here over trying to benefit trade. We think there's some real opportunities in the Asian Pacific area for countries, maybe not those big hits like China, but there are some rounding areas there that we're focusing on moving into.
Well, I want to thank you because I'm confident that you've played a big role in helping the President alter his message a little bit to help benefit agriculture, and trade is probably the most important thing we can do to help stabilize the commodity market. So I appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. We are getting real close to having to leave, so if the remaining colleagues could try to go to 2 minutes, we'd appreciate it. But Mr. Lawson, 3 minutes, but if you could shorten that, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to be real short. Secretary, welcome, and I just want to thank you for coming to Florida A&M and the interaction with the students, the FHA, and the 4-H club that came from the high schools and stuff was really, really great. And your leadership in trying to make sure that with those agricultural students, the opportunity that was available for them to go into farming, all that was really, really great. And I don't have a question, so to speak. What I'm just say, as you work on how to alleviate fraud and abusive behavior and all this other stuff with the SNAP program, you know, I would like to keep abreast of it, because during the course of the hurricane and everything, that program was so important to people who didn't have no place else to turn. And I know the chairman probably going to be working on that in the Farm Bill, but anything that I can do and have the opportunity to sit down with you, I'll be willing to do it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you, sir. Mr. Arrington, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. I echo what my colleagues have said, in that you have been incredibly accessible, and you're leading by example with respect to your principle of customer service, and it's just it's quite amazing, really, with the job that you have. Every time I've needed to talk to you, you've made yourself available, and I just thank you so much for that. Thanks for all your efforts on cotton and the 199A. You get it, you understand it, you're engaged, and so greatly appreciate that. One big high level, because I have so many questions, but in the interest of time, to me, the biggest issue for us all as ag advocates is the culture of this country, and the culture and the mentality of the representatives here in Washington, especially urban and suburban, on ag safety net. And that it's not just the 20 million jobs, it's not just rural economic development, it is national security. It is agriculture independence, food security, as you've said so eloquently. While we're trying to influence the culture here, I'm praying that you're influencing the culture of the White House and the administration. The President has a heart for the forgotten man. Does he understand, and does the administration, we had a briefing yesterday with Mick Mulvaney, good guy. I think his heart's in the right place. I don't know that he understands this issue of the national security implications of the ag safety net and getting it right. Tell me about that and that mentality among your peers throughout the administration. Are you making headway there? Because I know you're a champion for it.
We do. We have weekly trade meetings, and obviously people know what I'm going to say, but we say it, keep on saying it. I think, again, the interesting thing from your concern, I think the NSC gets it, I think the DOD gets it, and I think other people of national security jobs understand that food security is national security. We're blessed in this country not to have to import food. You think about, you know, the efforts over oil, what would happen if we were battling over food? And that's benefit. The problem is some people, we're so complacent about that, we've taken it for granted, and it's insidious over the policies that we make. if we don't stay on top of that through research and other type of safety net products, it can be gone before we know it, and it's difficult to recover. So we're trying to spread that message certainly internally and externally all across the country.
Gentleman's time is General's back. Mr. Fazo, 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will be very short, and maybe your staff can reply in writing to these questions. First is not a question. Mr. Secretary, you're a great Secretary of Agriculture. You're a credit to the Department and our country. Thank you so much for your service. Number two, this is a first question. The meat processors in my area are having a terrible time getting access to facility. I can't get a USDA grader to come in and inspect chickens. They have to come from Pennsylvania or Connecticut. It poses an expensive situation for the farmer. So I'd like to talk to the department about that. Number two, how can we enhance dairy consumption, milk consumption in particular? You've done a great job allowing the flavored low-fat milk into the school lunch program. We need to really promote that to get a new generation drinking good quality milk. And number three, Mr. Secretary, really appreciate your efforts on broadband, and it's vitally important to our rural economies, and I hope that we can continue to work with you. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Allen, 3 minutes.
I too will be brief, but Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to let you know how proud Georgia is of you and your work here in this body and at USDA. Thanks for your work clarifying the domestic and imported peanut program. That's been a big help to our folks. Do know that there are real concerns out there with rural lending. I met with a group of our farmers. They need some flexibility, and I'll be happy to meet with your folks about that and about that meeting. But we do need some flexibility because credit it seems to be tight, and our farmers, as you know, are really in a tough spot. As far as cotton, thank you for your help with that. Obviously, we have got to get something done on that, and appreciate your efforts there. And then I'll just also talk about rural broadband. I mean, that's a critical issue. But again, you're on top of these things, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for all you're trying to do over there. And if I can help you with anything, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Bacon, General Bacon.
Thank you for being here, sir. You're doing a great job. When I talk to our folks in Nebraska, number one concern is affordable crop insurance. Two, they're really worried about trade. Every other row of soybeans is exported, every third row of corn, largest beef exporter. So they're very nervous about the talk that comes out of the administration, as you know. So we got to really work hard to make sure we don't throw the agriculture export successes out as we deal with other issues in NAFTA. I want to ask you a question for the record, but I'll just we'll do a written response. What is your assessment for FMD vaccine, and how can we get to that the best? I hear a lot of that from our pork and cattlemen, and we'll just formally ask that question down the road and get a response back. The question I have for you today is, there's a series of articles out right now talking about how we're losing about $60 million in pork due to a disease called PRRS. And there's a way to do gene editing to stop it, but FDA treats it as a heavy drug treatment, and therefore it's under heavy regulation. We can't get this thing treated like we could. Can't we ask FDA to change its approach? Is there a better way to go about it? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, Mr. Secretary, again, thank you so very much for being here. Appreciate you willing to answer the questions for the record. I was particularly thankful for your comments about FMD and getting your team to give us better data, better information about the various opportunities we have in that regard. You are doing a terrific job at USDA. You've become a terrific partner, and your agency as well. Thank you for helping us get a farm bill that's written, and then we'll look forward to working with you on the implementation phase once we get this thing done and done on time. So thank you for being here. Chair, remind members there'll be, let's see, before we adjourn, under the rules, the committee today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material, supplementary written responses from the witness. With that, the Committee on Agriculture adjourned.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm tailing Charlie.